This video is about completing the square. So remember, when completing the square, standard form for a quadratic formula is ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. So let's take, for example, 6x squared plus 6x plus 9 is a perfect square trinomial because when we factor, we get x plus 3 times x plus 3, or x plus 3 squared. To complete the square, you need to find your c values because you'll be given an equation with an ax squared and a bx. So for example, we'll get something like x squared plus 6x. And we need to find our c value. So to find your c value, you're going to take your b value. Remember that the b value is always in front of the x. So you're going to divide by 2. So 6 divided by 2 is 3. And then square that value to get that your c value in this case would be 9. When factoring completing the square after finding your c value, it takes the form of x minus b over 2 and x minus b over 2, or squared. Sometimes it might be a plus sign. So remember that it could be a plus or a minus sign depending on your equation. So in this case, we would have had x plus 3 times x plus 3. And because it's written twice, we can write it to the second power. So let's look at a few examples. The first one, find the value of c that makes the expression a perfect squared trinomial, then write the expression as a square of a binomial. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at our equation, and we have that our b value is 10. So to get our c value, it's 10 divided by 2 squared. So 10 divided by 2 is 5. Squared is 25. So I'm going to rewrite this expression putting 25 in place of c. So when I rewrite this, I get x squared plus 10x plus 25. Now we're going to factor it. The fast way to factor it is to remember that we just need to split our b value. So half of 10 is 5, so each parenthesis would get x plus 5 times x plus 5. Remember, when you have the same binomial, you can write it to the second power. So let's practice solving a perfect square binomial. So in this case, we already have our perfect square binomial done, and we have x minus 3 squared equals 16. Remember, to get something by itself when it's squared, you need to take the square root of both sides. When you take the square root of a side, remember that it's equal to plus or minus the square root of the number. Remember, it's plus or minus because any number that we take squared would get us back to it. So for example, 3 squared is 9, and negative 3 squared is also 9. That's why we would have a plus or minus. So back to this problem, the square root of 16, we have x minus 3 equals plus or minus 4. Now we need to solve for x, so we're going to split this into two problems. We're going to have x minus 3 equals 4, and x minus 3 equals negative 4, and we're going to solve for x. So I'm going to add 3 to both sides, and I get that x is 7, or add 3 to both sides and get that x is negative 1. So let's take this idea of completing the square and solving to our last few examples. Completing the square. When completing the square, make sure that your constant value is on the other side of the equal sign. So in this case, 9 is on the other side of the equal sign. So I'm going to rewrite this and leave a space for my c value that I need to find. So x squared plus 8x plus blank equals 9 plus blank. When you have an equation and you are completing the square, the number that you put in for your c has to go on both sides of the equation to make sure the equation stays balanced. So in this case, our b value is 8. So to find c, it's 8 divided by 2 squared, which is 16, because 8 divided by 2 is 4. 4 squared is 16. So I'm going to add 16 to both sides. And now I'm going to factor this side. So when I multiply, remember, I get x plus 4 because half of 8 is 4, and x plus 4. Make sure that your binomials are the same. And then 9 plus 16 equals 25. So we get x plus 4 squared equals 25. Now we're going to solve for x. So I want to take the square root of both sides. X plus 4 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 25. Remember that the square root of 25 is 5. So we have x plus 4 equals plus or minus 5. And we're going to split this up into two equations. So x plus 4 equals 5. And x plus 4 equals negative 5. So the first equation, I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides. And x equals 1. The second equation, I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides. And x is negative 9. Example B. So our number is on the opposite side, but this x needs to be moved to join the other x. So I'm going to add x to both sides. X squared plus 2x equals 3. Now I can do completing the square, so I'm just going to rewrite this and leave some space. X squared plus 2x plus blank equals 3 plus blank. So if my b value is 2, to find my c value, it's 2 divided by 2 squared. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 1 squared is 1. So I'm going to add 1 to both sides and factor. So half of 2 is 1. So in each parenthesis, I get x plus 1 equals 4. So we get x plus 1 squared equals 4. Now that we've completed the square, we're going to solve for x. So I'm going to divide by x on both, or take the square root of both sides. So I get x plus 1 equals plus or minus the square root of 4. Remember, the square root of 4 is 2. So x plus 1 equals plus or minus 2. Split this apart to solve for x. So x plus 1 equals 2, and x plus 1 equals negative 2. When I subtract 1, I either get x is equal to 1, or subtract 1 and get x is equal to negative 3. One more example. So with every other completing the square, we've had a leading coefficient with my x squared equal to 1. In this case, it's a 2. So because I'm solving by completing the square, I can divide out the greatest common factor. So the greatest common factor between everything here is 2. So I'm going to divide every term by 2 before I do anything else. So when I do that, I get x squared minus 10x minus 171 equals 0. Next, in order to get x by itself, I'm going to add 171 to both sides and leave my space for my perfect square. So x squared minus 10x plus blank equals 0 equals 171 plus blank. So if my b value is negative 10, to get my c value, negative 10 divided by 2 squared is 25. So I'm going to add 25 to both sides. Now here to complete the square, notice that 10 is negative this time. So when I cut it in half, that value is now negative 5. So x minus 5 times x minus 5 squared equals 196. So x minus 5 squared equals 196. To solve for x, I need to take my square root first on both sides. X minus 5 is equal to plus or minus the square root of 196. Remember that the square root of 196 is 14. So x minus 5 is equal to plus or minus 14. I'm going to split this up to solve for x. So x minus 5 equals 14, or x minus 5 equals negative 14. To solve for x, I'm going to add 5 on both sides. So first we get x is 19 or we get x is negative 9.